is if I give you these three things and I'm sitting down. Number one, before you make your move, ensure that you know God. Ensure that you know God. I would venture to say that everyone in this building says that they know God, but a lot of us also identify with these Israelites. Leviticus 11:45 says, I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy because I am holy. If you plan on successfully picking up what others could not handle, it's imperative that you know God. The main issue that Israel ran into was not their slave-like mentalities. It was not that they often operated out of fear. Their main issue was that they knew about God, but many of them did not know God. Many of them believed that God was real, but they did not believe in God. James tells us, you believe that there is one God, and that's good. But even the demons believe that God exists, and they tremble. Many of us don't even do that. The difference is knowing God exists and proving it with our actions. In the English language, we've been taught that to believe is an action that takes place in the mind. But in the Greek, the word believe is the word pisteuo. It's a verb. It's something that you do. There was a commercial a few years back. You may remember it. I remember when I was a child. It was a commercial, and at the end of every commercial, it always ended with the same phrase. It said, verb. It's what you do. It was targeted it was aimed at kids to get them to get outside and play. It said, verb. It's what you do. Jump. It's what you do. Kick. It's what you do. Run. It's what you do. What Israel missed was believe is not something that you think. Believe, it's a verb. It's what you do. God is promising us some things, but before you make a move in this next phase of your life, you ought to just believe God. How do I believe God? You start expecting God to shift some things in your life. You see, I expect God to promote me. I expect God to heal me if I'm sick. I expect God to protect me. I expect God to provide all my needs. I expect God to help me through the school year. I expect God to help me through finals. I expect God to keep me from cussing people out. I expect God to provide this church with another pastor. I expect God to do everything that God says that He will do. But if you want to see God move, you got to move. If you want to see God shake some things up in your life, you got to start shaking things up. Belief in God is not a thought process. Belief in God is what you expect, and belief is a verb, so it's what you do. Number one, I told you, before you make your move in this next phase of your life, you got to ensure that you know God. Number two, you got to remember others' past mistakes and what it cost them. A contributing factor as to why these Israelites were denied access into the promised land is because of what we call generational curses. They've been slaves for 430 years. Their slave mindsets were passed down from generation to generation. If you plan on going further and achieving what others in your position were unable to, you got to start breaking some cycles in your life. Are y'all hearing me? You want to be a father to your children, but you can count on one hand how many times you've seen your own dad. Well, you got to break the cycle. You want to be the first in your family to go to college and to get the degree. You got to break the cycle. You don't want your last name to precede you in a negative way before you ever step foot into a room. You got to break some cycles. It was never supposed to take the Israelites 40 years to get into the promised land. But because they were a people with slave-like mindsets and hearts of unbelief and passing it on constantly to every generation after them, ultimately causing them to miss out on the promised land, God said, for the 40 days that you spent contemplating, figuring out every reason why it wouldn't work, why it can't work, you'll now have 40 years to wonder and get this, to know my rejection. Now, I can handle people not liking me. I can handle people hurting me. I can handle people not accepting me, but maybe you're different than me, but I cannot handle God rejecting me. Had they just broken the cycle, life wouldn't be so hard. If they just broke the cycle, everything they wanted and needed would have been provided in the promised land. Let me shock you with something that I'm sure y'all have no clue about. We as a church in Progressive Union, not too much different. We'll break a family before we break a cycle. We'll break ministries before we break a cycle. We'll kick folk out for the way that they look and the way that they dress and the way that they sound before we break a cycle. I don't care if it's at home or it's in the church. Not breaking cycles will hinder your growth in life and will adversely affect every generation coming after us. If you plan on moving forward, you got to break cycles. You got to remember everybody else's actions and what it cost them, how it hurt them, what it did to their reputation, and don't repeat their mistakes.